Welcome to another community conversation. My name is Ian Parkinson, and I'm here today with Ashley Howes with the Working Group for Accessibility and Inclusion. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, thank you so much.
So, welcome, Working Group, Accessibility and Inclusion almost sound like two different programs, for a better word. So let's go with the accessibility first.
Sure.
When, as you're part of community development department with the city, but by accessibility, what do you mean? What are you looking for? What do you provide?
So I guess you're not wrong when we talk about that acronym working group on accessibility and inclusion. It's broad and it's really, really big. So accessibility really is just that umbrella term for making sure that we have places and spaces that are for everyone in our city. I think it's really important to make sure that a space that I'm going to utilize is going to be a space that you can utilize as well. And so that's really the lens in which we look at when we talk about that accessibility, places and spaces that are accessible for everybody.
Now, you obviously head up the working group for accessibility and inclusion, but who else works with you?
Well, so I'm really lucky. I actually just get to be the staff person, the staff support that works with the working group on accessibility and inclusion. Our members, though, are made up of 75% so we have 12 people as our membership, and then 75% of those members actually have a disability. And when we talk about disability, it's important to remember, too, that we talk about disabilities you can see and those that you can't see as well. So they are the ones that are actually really doing that work. They're the ones that will inform different departments of the City of Medicine Hat or different organizations on what accessibility actually looks like for them as they live their day-to-day lives.
So there's much more to what you're providing through the city to the community than just a wheelchair ramp on the corner of the street.
Yes, absolutely. It's like you said before, it's a really big definition. And so it is so much more than that. Sometimes it's walking through a space to see if it makes sense for somebody with vision loss. Sometimes it's checking and making sure that, there are accessible parking spots, doing walks downtown, partnering with our municipal works department, partnering with Parks and Recreation. Anything that a city department sort of brings to us and says, hey, could you take a look at this? Is this something that maybe you could look at through the lens of accessibility and inclusion? And the working group jumps on it and says, absolutely, we can tell you. And they love being able to provide that really high level feedback to the city departments.
Now that's accessibility. So you must work very closely with Parks and Recreation as well. I mean, the Esplanade is, I think, probably one of the most accessible buildings for anyone.
Yeah. So that's something I think with the city that we're really lucky. Not only do we work really closely with Parks and Recreation because they obviously will have a ton of people who are utilizing and using their spaces. I think it's really important to remember we grow as we go and we learn as we go. So some builds that had been built, years and years and years ago might not be up to sort of those accessibility standards we would look at now. But that's the whole reason of having the working group in the first place, is to be able to, when we have some funds, to be able to look at that, or to be able to go, okay, you know what, what was the standard then, but this is the standard now, and do some of that changing and retrofitting of buildings.
Yeah. Now, we spoke about this earlier. Where does your mandate come from?
So it's really interesting as far as the working group on accessibility and inclusion. A lot of people think that we must have provincial mandate as far as accessibility, but there actually isn't any. The province of Alberta does not have any mandate on accessibility at this time. So other provinces do. I think Ontario does, Saskatchewan does, but we do not. So everything that we do really comes down from the federal government with their Accessible Canada Act. And they are really pushing for the provinces to make Canada accessible by 2040. So that's sort of some of the work that's being informed, but it hasn't come there yet. So the municipality really took this on and said, you know what, we really believe in accessibility, we really believe in inclusion. And so they started doing and making some inroads into those kind of things. Because when we talk about inclusion, we also talk about disability issues, but we talk about culture. We talk about so many different things, and that is under the umbrella of my position as well. So it's pretty big.
So there's a there's a cultural component to accessibility and inclusion.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah. So, particularly with inclusion, we want to make sure, again, that our people in Medicine Hat feel like they belong here. So in 2014, the city actually signed on to be a Canadian municipality against racism and discrimination. They have now changed and they're called the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities, but it's all under that same umbrella. And what they do is work towards the UN's goals of making sure that our communities basically do have that inclusion. And that again is multifaceted. That's making sure there's programming, that there's spaces, that there's places for people to live, work, and play, basically.
Okay, so then you must work very closely with the um, roads and streets. I mean, Managing Director Pat Bohan. I mean,
Yeah,
as
somewhat.
they're doing this Division Avenue, there's 3rd Street.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, we're so lucky because they really care. Our municipal works department really do care about, when they're creating something or doing something, they really think of the people first. And that is the biggest thing with the city. They want to think of the people first. And WGAI, Working Group on Accessibility and Inclusion, that's the whole reason why they were created, is so that people like Pat can bring things to us and say, we're really thinking of doing this, this, and this. Does this fit? Does that, how does that look? And not from the technical perspective, because we're not going to be doing the technical stuff that they can do, obviously, but really just from that, from start to finish, is this a space that you could see yourself in? Is this a space that you'd be able to utilize? Is really, really the biggest thing. So there's a bit of that work. Sometimes it comes down to even just they've got a concern about signage, or is the lettering big enough? Can people see it? All of those kind of things, and it's things that often day to day people don't think about.
Well, that makes sense because I mean, obviously, you're with the majority of your working group being handicapped to some degree. They're the ones that are gonna not see a sign where I just say and walk by it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So inclusion, your department, as well as doing the accessibility inclusion, do you also include the word truth and reconciliation comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another community inclusion coordinator who's my counterpart, and she is an Indigenous specialist. So that is absolutely the work that she is focusing on. That role is fairly new to the city of Medicine Hat, but definitely making some inroads there. And I think the public can look forward to seeing some really great things coming out of, her name is Allie, and she'll start doing some really amazing work in kind of that truth and reconciliation space, as well as other Indigenous initiatives.
Are there other projects the Working Group on Accessibility and Inclusion is working on besides obviously 3rd Street and Division Avenue?
Sure. So the Working Group on Accessibility and Inclusion, I mean, often the city, different departments will bring things to us, but they do create goals every year. And those goals often will be, living in the community, they'll see certain things, they'll go, hey, I'm wondering about this, or could we maybe create this? Right now for us, we're talking a lot more about bylaw, we're talking about accessible parking stalls, those kind of things. So what they do is they create goals for the year.
Okay.
And then my job is really to support those goals. So do they want a guest speaker? Do they want to talk about accessible transit? Do they want to bring people in to have those conversations? So it really sort of runs the gamut of what they're feeling like they would like to maybe work on this year. And that will change and shift as they, get more awareness of different things, different spaces, all of that stuff. So it really is pretty movable.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned bylaws because, the city of Medicine Hat is probably on, I'll say, one of the leaders in accessibility and inclusion because, they have to change the bylaw to make the parking slot wider so you can get the door open to get out of your wheelchair into the vehicle, or mothers with young children with strollers and prams.
Yeah.
So.
We're really, again, we're so lucky because I have to say, the city departments really do aim to work together. And whether that be, sometimes it doesn't seem super relational that community development would be working with municipal works or bylaw or parks and rec, but it's it's pretty amazing. All you have to do is send an email and you get a response really quickly from somebody, because our managers, our managing directors, the people that work for the city really do care. And it's easy to say that, but when you're working in it and you're bringing an issue, when you get that responsiveness, which we always do, of somebody wanting to help or somebody wanting to have a meeting and have a conversation and even to meet with our working group, it's incredible to see. And that's how we really see that momentum and that work move forward. It's partnership.
Yeah.
And that communication, which is really important.
How often does your working group meet?
We meet once a month. So it's every, I think, second Wednesday of the month, something like that. We just changed it. But yeah, we meet once a month, and we have good conversations, and we have a whole agenda and everything. So it's very professional, the way that it's done. But the conversations are just incredible. It's a wonderful, wonderful group of people.
What are some of your successes?
Oh, goodness. So I took over the working group on accessibility inclusion not that long ago. So I really can't put my name on too many of their successes. That would have been my predecessor for sure. But again, I think one of the big successes is just that idea that we even have a working group. It's such a success because it's a group we're called a working group. So it's in the title. It's a group that's actually doing work that really does inform the city of Medicine Hat. And they're listened to and they're treated like the subject matter experts that they are. And I think that is a huge success. It's one thing to read something from a book and say, oh, this is the standard and we're going to build to this or we're going to do this. But like I said, that listening and the things that the departments do to listen to the working group, that is probably our number one success right now.
And it's obviously working because I've seen the kind of wheelchair ramps for sidewalks.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a fancy, the noisemakers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You're obviously working very closely with the city itself to provide accessibility and inclusion. What about the private sector?
So, we oftentimes will get, the private sector, if they want to learn from WGAI, Working Group on Accessibility and Inclusion, if they want to bring us in on something, we're absolutely happy to do that at any time. We don't get as many requests, I think, from there at this point, but we're open to it. The one thing for sure about the group is that they are so happy to spread that information around, because at the end of the day, they want to be able to go into a local coffee shop or to go to wherever, the mall, and have it be an accessible space for them. So I think more and more awareness that gets brought to the working group, the more and more people are going to start going, hey, you know what, when we go to build this, we're going to do an accessible build, or we're going to do a home like this, or we're going to do those things. The other thing to consider as well is that when we talk about that accessibility, we do have an aging population in Medicine Hat. So for home builders and things like that, it's actually something that, we want them to be listening to people like the working group to say, hey, you know what, we're building these wonderful homes, but how do we allow people to stay in these homes and age there if they're not accessible? Because what's accessible for me now is not going to be accessible for my parents. And it really makes a huge difference. And so it kind of is all a trickle-down effect as well.
Stairs at 28 are no big deal. Stairs at 88 are a big issue.
That's right.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come and talk about the working group. They are just such a wonderful group. It's just been so amazing for me to be able to even learn from them. I learn something all the time. So really just the encouragement that people know that there's a group like this that does exist within the city of Medicine Hat. And while we are internal, we still love to invest in all places in Medicine Hat and learn about the things that people need and are wanting to change. You can only change the things that you know about. And we want to empower people to make sure that we are here and we're listening. And yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.